Hi, I'm Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today we have a very interesting story to bring you. Still developing, and we're getting more details, but joining us today is Laurie Gross. She is one of the three election commissioners out of Searcy County. Those three were just recently decertified by the State Board of Election Commissioners over what they say regarding allegations for accepting equipment donation. Was that really a donation? Was it a rental fee? We're going to get into all of those details and bring you what we know. Laurie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Yeah.
This is a story that a lot of people are talking about right now. Like I mentioned, the details are still developing. But as far as Searcy County has been in the news really for the past almost year and a half now. Searcy County did something that was the first thing to happen in the state of Arkansas back in August of 2023 regarding hand-counted paper ballots. For our viewers who are not really caught up with everything that's been going on in Searcy County, just very briefly, give us a rundown of where things were back in 2023 and also beginning of that year. That's when you were elected election commissioner. Give us just some background info on things in Searcy County.
I'm not quite sure how the topic initially got started in our county, the paper ballot versus the machines topic. There may have been a presentation in our county. There were some people who were saying we really need to go back. We need to be able to audit our ballots. And hand marked paper ballots are really the only auditable form of voting that we have. And so that conversation began developing in our county over the early months of 2023. I had been coordinator the year before, but I was still really new to elections. And we did what other counties did. We used the machines, the voting machines and the tabulators. And that seemed easy. Machines are easy. And I just been learning how to use the machines. And so we had a very new commission in 2023. I was one of the Republican commissioners. We were both new. We'd never been commissioners before. The Democrat commissioner had been commissioner, but he was the one where there were two Republicans. He said mostly he just had to follow along because they always outvoted him on everything. But he was our only experienced commissioner. And what happened over those months leading up to August, when our quorum court actually passed the resolution for paper ballots, the our county Democrat committee, our county Republican committee, both passed resolutions wanting hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots in our county. So it was a county-wide movement, and it was bipartisan in a very big way. We the at that By that time, uh, the quorum court was getting a lot of phone calls, and they appointed a committee. They wanted us to investigate what's going to happen if we go paper ballots. What's it going to cost? What's going to be required of the county? And all of the details. What are we looking at? They didn't want to make a decision until they had some facts, because as you know, with this issue, there's a lot of emotion, a
Sure.
lot of emotion. And so I was on that committee. It was a group of seven people from around the county. And I looked into, because I was a commissioner, I could get the details of what we had paid in the previous year for to run the elections.
Hmm.
And so I looked into the financial aspects of it, and I researched what it would cost to go to paper ballots. And we presented our report to the quorum court in August of 2023. And when I started the process, I was kind of on the fence. I knew that I wanted secure elections. I knew
Sure.
that being able to audit the voters' wishes was important. Being able to go back and see what the voter wanted, if you did an audit. I knew those were important, but I wasn't convinced that going back to paper ballots was a great idea until I spent 6 weeks researching the topic. By the end of those 6 weeks, I was a very strong proponent of hand-marked, hand-counted paper ballots. So based on the information that our committee put forth, they passed a resolution. At that time, we had 8. We were missing one of our. We typically have 9 JPs. We had 8. The vote was 5-3 to pass the resolution for paper ballots. I'm sorry, 6-2. It was 6-2.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we endeavored into a very uphill learning curve, like straight up, because none
Yeah.
of us had ever. Well, we'd never been commissioners before. So not only were we new to elections, but we'd never done a paper ballot election. And we found that our state board was not able to help us very much with how do
Okay.
you count them? How do you ensure? How do you have the paperwork so that your elections are secure? How do you have paperwork for ballot integrity? All of those things we really had to develop on our own. We didn't have very long because the primary in 24 was in March.
Yeah.
And so in March, we had our first hand marked, hand counted paper ballot election in our county at the primary. And it went well. Um, but in the end, our hand count missed 8 votes, and which showed up in the audit.
Okay.
We were horrified because we'd worked so hard to do it,
Sure.
get it done well, and to do a good job. And that seemed to support what the state was saying when the state was against paper ballots, which is that you can't get an accurate count with hand counted ballots. They were comparing machine audits with auditing hand counts, and I would say their mantra was that machine audits of machine tabulated ballots are always 100% accurate. The tabulations are always 100% accurate. And hand counts can't always be like that. And then we were not 100% accurate. So that seemed to support that mantra. By then, we had realized that there was a lot of opposition to our county having paper ballots. I guess the
At that,
opposition, I should
yeah,
go
at
back.
that, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I kind of skipped over all of the opposition that we encountered when we were investigating paper ballots before our
So
form was
even
actually voted.
before you guys move forward, just with the simple resolution and you guys looking at the research and benefits and potentially moving, even in those beginning planning stages, there was immense opposition. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there were our JPs had a lot of phone calls from statewide organizations, I think from some legislators, I think from some state offices, telling them do not go to paper ballots. And the primary message was you will bankrupt your county. They cost so much. Paper ballots are going to bankrupt your county. But that's why they had us do the research. What's it going to cost? And the research shows that machine elections are incredibly much more expensive than paper ballot elections. Machines are expensive.
Yeah.
And if you take a ballot marking device, with the screen, the electronic
Mhm.
screen where you touch and then it spits out your votes on a piece of paper, which is the way most people vote in Arkansas. Really, if you think about it, that machine is simply a pen. It's writing down on paper what you want to vote for.
Yeah.
And it costs, well, the old ones cost $4,000. The new ones are going to cost $8,000 a piece. But if you're marking a paper ballot, you're using a 50-cent pen and you're
Yeah.
writing down your choices. The
So
difference is pretty incredible.
yeah, it is. And so the opposition, the JPs were receiving incredibly, just a large amount of opposition then. Did you ever at any time have other special interest groups reach out or say, the Arkansas Association of Counties, or was there anything like that during that time?
They were reaching out to the JPs. They weren't talking to us.
Who is they?
I'm sorry.
Who is they?
Oh, the Arkansas Association of Counties. They were contacting our JPs. According to my JPs, They told me, they said, we're getting these threatening phone calls from the AAC. Uh, I never had one of those calls, and I don't think anybody ever put anything in writing. And I know that at some point, um, they wrote a letter. Someone from the AAC wrote a letter saying, we're not opposed to paper ballots. It's not up to us to decide paper ballots or not. But I know what the JPs told me, the phone calls they got were threatening phone calls. And our county judge received a lot of threatening phone calls saying you're going to ruin your county if you go to paper ballots.
Hmm.
You do not want the repercussions of going to paper ballots.
Yeah, I know our viewers will remember this. Representative Britt McKenzie filed a bill during this past legislative session that would prohibit organizations from using taxpayer dollars to lobby against taxpayers. And a representative from the Arkansas Association of Counties was there opposing the bill. And of course, they do receive tax dollars. So let's move forward. You guys prepped and you had the primary. There was a discrepancy of votes. You mentioned 8 votes. And then moving forward to the summer, there was again the audit, and then came legislative scrutiny, where you all or several people from Searcy County were summoned before the Joint Performance Review Committee. Talk to us about that.
Well, we went down there. We didn't really know what to expect. They didn't tell us what they wanted to talk about. They just summoned us. So we went down, and it ended up that really it was an interrogation about why did you do this and why did you do that and how much did it cost and why in the world, how could you miss those votes? And I mean, it's recorded somewhere. It was about 2.5, maybe 3 hours, a fairly intense interrogation. The state board, the attorneys for the state board of election commissioners were there. They had some members from Saline County, county judge, and I can't remember.
Yeah, there are various people. I remember watching it, and I remember thinking, man, I wish some of our legislators and others got this level of scrutiny whenever
Right.
they write legislation and spend our money. But, that's neither here nor there. I remember watching that, and what we will do is when we share this, we will have a link to that June 10th Joint Performance Review Committee. But following that meeting, you all received an audit. How many times were you guys audited?
Well, every election was audited. But we also, interestingly, right, we had a runoff for our primary. And so on the first day of that runoff, the State Board of Election Commissioners FOIA'd us for a massive amount of papers. Now, our county's small, like a lot of counties in Arkansas. We do not have a staff. It's just the 3 election commissioners and a
Yeah,
coordinator. And we all work full time, separate from the election. We don't even have a computer in our office because there's no Wi-Fi where our office is. And so for them to FOIA us for that amount of paperwork, it's hours and hours, man hours, going into the files, pulling the files, copying the paperwork that they wanted, putting it together. It was a stack of paperwork, maybe I would say this big once it was copied. It was a huge stack of paperwork.
yeah,
And they FOIA'd us in the middle of a runoff election when we're trying to run an election.
yeah.
It was very distracting. Now, they did give us a couple of extra weeks. We had an attorney at that point
Okay.
who requested some extra time, and they gave us the extra time.
Okay. That
Um,
was going to be my question. Okay. So
right,
you did get extra time in
we
getting
did.
them
We got
that
extra
for you.
time. Right. And
Okay.
all of that was, I guess, information preparing for that legislative interrogation on June the 10th. That happened first. And we we wanted them to look at what we were doing because we wanted to do a good job. We knew that we were inexperienced. And so we did not mind the scrutiny at all. I
Yeah.
mean, I really think the state board is in a very unenviable position because they're tasked really with training us. That's their job. And when we have questions, they're the people we're supposed to go to for help, for clarification of the law. But they're also, it's also their job to prosecute
Mm.
um, illegal activities in an election or questionable activities. So they're like a training arm and they're a prosecuting arm. And that's not it's really not a good place to be.
Yeah,
That
I do.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
And I do want to, as we work through this timeline, I do want to talk about the broader implications and especially just the board and the power that they have in being able to do something like this with elected officials. But so they FOIA documents from you all and they had the joint performance review in that review, so to get people caught up, you all were decertified over a $100 discrepancy rental fee for a camera. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you all did that exact same action during the primary season,
Sure.
and that showed up in the audit. Uh, the Joint Performance Review Committee saw that, and the state was okay with it, and things were moving forward. Do I have that
That,
right?
that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. We, what our primary goal as we got together as a new commission, we said, what are our goals? What do we want to really focus on? And one of the things we wanted to do was increase voter participation in our county. We, I mean, it's fairly abysmal all over Arkansas. And our county actually isn't as bad as a lot of counties, but it's not over 50%. We're like at like 45 or 48% voter turnout. And we felt like it could be more if we really focused on that, on educating our voters and communicating with our voters. And we're a small enough county that's kind of easy to do, kind of all know one another.
Yeah.
And we talked to people, and what the primary thing we heard is we do not think our vote counts. We don't think it matters, and we don't trust those machines. So
Hmm.
after paper ballots came out and we were doing paper ballots, we had people who said, well, what if you cheat when you're counting the ballots? I mean, so then we were hearing the other viewpoint because,
Sure.
you know, there was a lot of nefarious stuff that went on back when it was
Yeah.
only paper ballots, in some of these counties. And so we thought, what can we do to help them be comfortable so that they know that there's nothing nefarious going on? And we thought, a really awesome thing. I mean, let's make technology work for us.
Hmm.
And so what we wanted to do was put cameras over the table where they were tallying the ballots. And so we had cameras with monitors on the wall so that anyone could sit there where we were counting and they could literally watch them tally the ballot. They
Oh.
turn the ballot, they go to the next ballot, they turn. Any candidate could sit there while their ballots were being counted and watch it happen and tally it for themselves. We were just very, very interested in as absolute much transparency as we could manage. And so, but of course, we're not a wealthy county. We're on a budget. We couldn't purchase that kind of equipment. So we looked around and we found someone who could lease that equipment to us.
Mhm.
And they offered the lease for $100. We leased
Mhm.
it for a day. I didn't shop around. We could pay $100. And so we did. And all of that was on display when we were being monitored in the primary, when we were being questioned about the primary. I mean, everything we did was scrutinized in that primary.
Were there any objections
Nobody said
whatsoever when you all had that lease agreement during the primary?
nobody said a word. Nobody even mentioned it. And because of the level of scrutiny that we've been under, I mean, let me just say, it never occurred to us that it would be a problem. We never said, oh, well, nobody said anything about it, so we can do it. We never thought about it.
Um,
We knew that we could not accept donations. It's a clear law. We're very aware of the law. As a matter of fact, we had to tell local um, restaurants to stop sending lunch to our poll workers on long election days because of that law. So
No
we
good
were,
deed goes unpunished.
I'm telling you. So so we were very aware of the law, but
Sure.
we had a lease agreement. We
Okay.
paid them. They fulfilled their contract with us. We discussed it. One of the things that we had not done is prior to the primaries, we had not discussed that lease agreement in a meeting where it was in our minutes. Well, I
Okay.
mean, we just spent the year learning how to do things and the way that
Yeah.
the state board wanted things documented. Now, they never said anything about that, but there was something else that happened that they said, well, did you discuss that in one of your public meetings and is it in your minutes? And it was like, it was a decision we'd made on the fly. So we hadn't discussed it. So we realized, okay, we need to have everything discussed in a public meeting in our minutes. And so in the next months, when we were starting to prepare for the general, the lease agreement was one of many things that we purposefully discussed before we did it. So it was in our minutes, but we didn't
Okay.
purposely do it because we thought it was a problem,
Hmm.
because we never considered that it might be a problem.
Well,
I
and probably with the scrutiny that you all were under, and then being called in front of joint performance and just the microscope, I think that has been on Searcy County, you probably were just trying to dot every I and cross every T. It's what it sounds like.
We were, and Jenny, what we wanted to do was we wanted to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Three professional people. Two of us are entrepreneurs. Ken Weekly, who's the third, he works for a very large company, travels a lot. He's an executive. We are professionals and we want to do things in a professional way. We want to do excellent work. And one of our goals was to set a standard in Searcy County and to document that standard for the people who came after us. Because when we became commissioners, well, when I became coordinator, which was a few months, the last few months of
Yeah.
22, there was not a file from previous commissions. I said, "What's my job description?" We don't know. Well, just show me what the last coordinator did. We don't know. Well, where is your files? I'll go through your files and I'll figure out what my job description is going to be. We don't have any files. And one of our goals was to change that for this county.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you and this may be a silly question. I'm not that familiar. Do other counties have a lease agreements? Is that something that's common or is that unusual?
Well, I don't know because I've never worked with other commissions, but I know that in our counties lease outside technicians, they lease equipment. Um, Leasing is an activity that counties engage in on a
Yeah.
regular basis. Our
Okay.
our goal ultimately was, because we know that we knew then. Now it's a little bit different because our machines are not certifiable because they don't meet the new 2.0 standards, the federal standards. But back then we knew that our machines, they're getting old and they're going to
Mhm.
have to be replaced. And our goal was, when we don't have to spend the money for all of those extra machines, we'll take a little bit of that money that we save and we will purchase the AV equipment that we need to continue with this
Mhm.
level of transparency. But until then, we were just trying to manage our budget and,
Sure.
good stewardship
Yeah.
and, but get the job done.
And I've been jumping around, but I just had that was one question I thought, I believe I'm reading this right, that what you all have been, um, you know, decertified for is something that they actually saw in the first audit. I just want to make sure that was the same thing from the primary. But fast forward to summer of July, you got July, August, September. That is when the state board director filed several complaints against the county. The commission notified opened a formal investigation. Walk us through the fall and then, leading up to the general election.
They found they said that there were complaints against that complaints had been filed against us. We thought that meant that somebody in our county had filed a complaint about the way that the election was run or the way they've been treated. And it turns out that it was Chris Madison, who is the director of the state board. He had filed complaints about us. And they were trying to, I don't even remember. I mean, so much has happened, and I don't
So
have that
much.
paperwork in front of me. I apologize. I didn't know we were going to go back there. Um,
Well, it was regarding the translucent, not transparent
oh,
ballot
yeah.
boxes,
I,
the scanning, the publishing, the tabulation methods. That was all part of his complaint back in July of 2024.
yeah. I'll give you an idea of one of the six complaints that they filed. When we were counting the ballots, hand counting, we had teams that we had trained. And we had monitors from the state board through the whole process. And when they showed up, we said, "Oh, we're so glad you guys are here because we want you to look and see what we're doing. If there's anything that needs to be tweaked, if we need to correct something, please let us know." Remember, this is our training
Yeah.
organization. This, this is the office that trains us. And so we saw them as our trainers. They're there. Yeah, they're there to make sure things go well, but we felt like they were also there to help us do a good job.
Mm.
And so throughout the day, one or the other of, I know that one of our commissioners asked them several times, "How's it going? Do you see anything we need to change?" You guys are doing a great job. As a matter of fact, we're very impressed with the level of training that your counters have because it was their first time. Everybody that was there was their first time to hand count paper ballots. And so we finished tallying all the ballots. And now what we're doing is we're doing our final count on the ballots from all the precincts. And we sat down at the table. We didn't leave that up to any staff. We wanted to do that as a commission ourselves. Well, the monitor's still there. And we had handheld calculators, which is the way that we had been tallying before. No one had told us that to do that final tally, you need to have an auditable paper trail. So we needed a 10 key with a tape.
Okay.
We didn't know that. And so we sat down to do this final count or tally, and there's a monitor sitting beside our table who never said, "Did you know that
Hmm.
it's a law that you have to be able to audit that final tabulation? So you need to have, you need to have a 10 key with paper." If he had said that, we would have stopped for a moment. Someone would have gone across the street to the office at the courthouse, got the proper equipment, brought it over, and we would have used that to count. He watched us count the whole thing without a tape. And one of the big things that they censured us for was that thing. And I got to tell you, Jenny, I feel like, yeah, we did break a law because we didn't know. Out of our ignorance, we broke that law. But that guy sat there watching us count. He knew the law and he watched us break the law without saying anything. I feel like if someone should be censured, it's the guy who knew what was happening and didn't stop it. Just my thoughts. We really felt that's the point when we began to say, these people are not for us, they're against us. We felt very betrayed by that. We felt like we had been purposefully entrapped, that they had just been sitting there waiting. The other thing, like they didn't like our ballot boxes. They said it was possible that somebody might, if a ballot went just right, see somebody's ballot after they dropped it in. But as far as I know, that never happened. They were not transparent ballot boxes. The law even says they need to be not transparent but translucent, which ours were, but we were censured on that as well. It was it was an eye-opening moment for us.
Yeah, so I'm sure it was. I think probably like a lot of people are going to be just hearing your testimony. It's a lot to digest and and to process. And a lot of this I'm learning for the first time. So it's Searcy County, y'all have really been under the microscope. I want to go to the general election.
Okay.
So in November, you all held the general election. You had monitors present. I can't imagine what the atmosphere was like then during the general. You just, the tensions that may be present. But you had the general, and again, subsequent audit. And in February of this year, the state audit finds 100% accuracy in your general election hand count. So I'm sure that
Yeah.
felt very good for you all. Been working so hard on this.
It was it was a pretty exciting moment for us. And basically what it did was it just said, all of the because that summer we spent hours and hours saying, how do we not make the mistake that we made in the primaries when we're counting and we're tabulating? How do we need to change our paperwork? And we had a pretty long list of things we wanted to at least tweak a little bit. Some things we wanted to change completely. Other things we just needed to, we needed new paperwork that we had never had before. But now we had an election under our belt. So we were ready to begin to do that. And it paid off. So we
Yeah.
felt so justified when that happened. And I know that my thought was 2024 had been so, as you say, it was so tense and so stressful, partly just because elections are important and we were new to it and we didn't want to do anything wrong. But then on top of that, we had this constant oppression from the state board. Every time we turned around, it was like we were getting hit again. We were getting hit again. We were getting hit again. It was like there was never any rest. We all seriously considered not coming back in 25,
Yeah.
because it's a 2-year term. But we felt like we've been audited every which way. They've looked up under everything. They've looked around everything. They've looked in everything. We've got nothing to hide. And we know what we're doing now. So we're ready for the next season. And we were looking forward going into a new election season with some experience. And then
Yeah.
in February, when our audit came, and it was 100%, we were overjoyed. And for me, it felt like we're coming out of the darkness and into the light. We're moving into a new season. And obviously now we've shown them we're going to do a good job and they're going to move on to harassing somebody else.
Lori, oh
That's what we
goodness, that wasn't the case. I'm sure how y'all felt because shortly after that, poll workers, you and others are still contacted, correct me if I'm wrong, by officials, even, to the point where you thought, I need to contact an attorney.
We did contact an attorney. What we had a school election. We did not all through all of that. We were also having problems in our county. We had 3 county clerks in 25 months. That doesn't happen very often. So typically your clerk's office is also a big support and a big help in an election. But our poor clerk's office was just a wreck, for all of that time that we're talking about. And so we almost couldn't get any information out of the county clerk's office because they were just trying to survive day to day, I'm sure. And so we did not know until the very last minute that we were actually going to have a school board election. And so at the very last minute, we had to really scramble to get our ballots to have a school board election that encompassed parts of 3 different counties. So we were working with 3 different clerk's offices. We'd never done that one before either. And there are some people at the state board who are really, really helpful. And one of those is somebody that I worked with all those years, starting with 22. Every time I had a question, would bend over backward to try to get me the answers. If it didn't have anything to do with paper ballot counting, because we didn't get any help there. But and I'm on the phone constantly with the very big confusion about this school board election. Like, how do we manage to work in 3 different counties?
Yeah.
And what do we do with their election commissions? And how do we work with their clerks? And in the middle of that, right in the middle of that, we get this subpoena from the state board to copy all this paperwork. It was a subpoena that was based on the monitor's report from November 24. Totally out of left field for us.
Okay.
We're like,
Yeah.
you got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. After we're 100% accurate, now we're getting this subpoena for this paperwork. And and I got a call saying, we want you to provide us a list of all of your poll workers, their emails, their addresses, their phone numbers. I'm in the middle of a complex election, and I said, I cannot do that for you right now because I can't hit a button on a computer. They're in paper, they're on paper in filing cabinets. I have to go pull all those things.
Sure.
And so I said, I will get you the information you need as soon as this election is over. But I have got to get through this complex election. I don't want to miss anything. So then we never heard anything else. Then we got a request to do some interviews with them. By then, we were concerned about what was going on. We said, well, what are the complaints against us? What are you looking at? What are you
What
investigating? No,
now?
they wouldn't tell us. They sent
Yeah.
us a copy of the monitor's report, parts of the monitor's report, underneath which was written files complaint, files complaint, files complaint. But we didn't know what they were filing as complaint. And I will tell you this, in the pages of that monitor's report, there were things that were not accurate in any way, shape, or form. They were inaccurate. So now I'm thinking they're basing complaints on a report that we've only seen part of it, but in the parts that we've seen, there are blatant inaccuracies. So we want to talk.
Did you try to correct that or let anyone know, hey, here are the inaccuracies?
As soon as when the election was over, we contacted them and said, okay, we'd like to not just we don't want to do a Zoom. All of us want to come down and sit with you at the same table and let's talk about what's going on. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's figure out what the problem is and let us answer your questions. And they said, it's too late for that. We're on a deadline. We're going to present the results of our investigation of this case to our board on June the 11th or whenever, yesterday. Was that yesterday?
The 11th.
like
Yeah.
a million years ago. Yeah. So they wouldn't talk to us.
Okay.
And
Yeah, and I'm sure that felt discouraging because, like you've articulated through this interview, yes, they are the board and they are there to investigate any wrongdoing or unethical action, but at the same time, they are also there to help train and equip you. And so you want to feel like you can go to these people in a friendly manner and work out these things. So I'm sure that was such a really tricky place to be.
it was confusing for us. And by then we knew that something was up because they weren't communicating with us. And so when we heard that they were going to present the results of their investigation, although they didn't get the paperwork they subpoenaed from us until I guess last week, because we'd gotten an extension for the subpoena. They wanted it in 3 days. Again, our attorney asked for 3 weeks extension. I don't know if we got it or not. They never responded, but we assumed since they didn't say no, and we couldn't do it anyway because we're in the middle of an election.
Yeah.
So once we certified the election, we took an entire day off work. 2 of us went to our office, copied all the papers, and sent them down to their office. And of course, in the meeting yesterday, they said, well, that we were uncooperative and we didn't provide the paperwork until the very last minute. But they knew what was going on because they had our request for an extension. They knew we were in the middle of an election. We told them we're happy to provide you the information. In addition, they had subpoenaed the clerk's office for, I guess, certain records pertaining to the election commission. And they said that they did not have any paperwork that showed that lease. Now they're talking about the lease, the $100 lease of the AV equipment, right? They said we didn't provide them with a contract or an invoice until the very last minute. And then they basically said, so we must have fabricated it at the last minute, which is not the case. It's the same lease agreement that we had at the primary, that was paid after the primary, the same organization, the same lease contract, and we had provided them. We had the invoice. It came late with all the other stuff after the 3 weeks. And I'm
So
sorry.
tell us, yeah, so tell us about June 11th and the board's decision. And, and I think it's really important for our viewers to kind of have this 30,000 foot view of everything that's gone on in Searcy County, because when they just read a headline, oh, board election commissioners decertified for 14 years, there's a lot that led up to that and a lot of details that are missed out. And some of the details are actually inaccurate. And so I'm really glad that you're walking us through this. But at the meeting yesterday, tell us what happened and just like I said earlier, just the broader implications of this board being able to come in and unilaterally decertify all of you, say for 14 plus years, you can't serve. I just tell us your thoughts.
Well, because we knew they were presenting our case, that they being the Chris Madison, who's the director, and he's an attorney, he was presenting the findings of the case against us, I guess, against us to the board. And I think that there are 6 people on the board and a chairman. And the Secretary of State is the chairman of the board or the chair of the
Was the
board. So,
Secretary of State present yesterday? I've gone online to
yes,
look for the video. It's not
yes,
online anywhere.
yeah,
Was he
yeah.
present?
He was
Okay.
he was present. So, so we knew that it was a public meeting, and I had called ahead of time, and they had told me that we would not be able to make comments, that the meeting, that they don't allow comments at their meeting. So we did not go there, but we also knew that they did not have very much information. We knew that they had some inaccurate information, but we still didn't know what the charges against us were. We had maybe a small clue, um, because
Did you all see the complaint at all? When you were walking into the meeting, June 11th, this is about you. You're about to be decertified potentially. Had you even
no,
seen a
it
copy of the
wasn't in
complaint?
writing. It wasn't in writing. When our attorney said you are required to provide a copy of the complaint, you have to, the law says you have to provide a copy of the complaint, for which the investigation is, that's behind the investigation. And we never did get that. What they did was they sent us a few pages of the notes from this monitor with a note under them saying file as complaint. But the complaint wasn't listed. So we still really had no idea. It turned out that there were 10 counts of complaint against us. And as they went through them one by one, and several of them they just dismissed because they really weren't worthy of consideration. There really wasn't any problem behind them. An example of one of them was one of our polling places on election day. One of the poll workers was talking about one of the issues that was on the ballot to one of the voters. Now, I know where that polling place is. That was probably a relative they were talking to, or a next door neighbor. However, it's still not okay. You
Yeah,
cannot electioneer.
yeah,
Electioneering is illegal.
that's right.
And so we knew about, the monitor told us later that day, she was there when it happened. And we immediately took action within our commission. First of all, we're going to let the poll worker know that we think it's maybe a good idea for her to sit out the next election and think about electioneering. But what we felt like was the supervisor was responsible for that, because it is the poll supervisor who's responsible for making sure things are done correctly. And that supervisor had supervised that poll for the last 8 or 10 years. And
Okay.
so within the commission, we had made a decision to replace the supervisor with another supervisor, not to allow her to work, but not to be the supervisor. So what they did, and the board did, was the board said electioneering is wrong. This is what happened. They decertified the poll worker. So she can't work an election for 4 years. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have done that. That was a legitimate complaint. It was
Sure.
it was a legitimate problem, which we were taking care of internally. But the board completely went around the commission. They went around our quorum court. They went around our county judge. They completely circumvented what I would call the proper line of authority and just fired a poll worker. Maybe that's their job. I don't know. But that was one of the legitimate complaints. The other thing that they did, one of the others that they did not dismiss, was against a supervisor who, when they, at the end of the day, the supervisors come to the courthouse after the polls close, and they bring their ballots and all their paperwork and everything. We check them in. We count their ballots and make sure they're all accounted for. Provisionals are really important. So after I deal with ballots, I say, do you have any provisionals? Because they're in a locked bag,
Yeah.
separated from everything else. They have to be escorted by two people. She said, no, we didn't have any provisionals. She said, I did have a couple of people who came in to vote and they were not in our poll book, but I called the clerk and I found out whose poll book they were in, and I gave them directions to their polling place and told them they had plenty of time to go vote where they were supposed to be voting. And now we're having this conversation. Chaos is all around us because people are checking in, right? It's the end of election day. And it's a small room, and the monitor was not sitting at the desk with us. So at some point, she picked up on one of the sentences that this supervisor said, which is, he asked me if he could still vote here rather than going to the other polling place. And I told him, yes, but it will be a provisional vote, and I cannot assure you that your vote will count. So you should, if you have time, go where you know for sure your vote will count. So the poll worker reported her as saying, I just told them that their vote wouldn't count if they did that. Which is this woman, she is a retired lieutenant colonel. She has a master's degree in team training. And she's one of the most quality people I've ever worked with. And yesterday, she was with me in the meeting yesterday, and they berated her, not knowing who she was. They said she was uncooperative because she wouldn't do an interview with them. She was out of the state when they contacted her and wanted to do an interview. She said, I'll be back next week. I can't talk to you till then. And I mean, they were maligning her and saying somebody like this shouldn't even be working in elections. I can't imagine anybody saying. They actually talked about decertifying her. They just decided to censure her. And when they were saying she was also completely uncooperative and wouldn't talk to us, I stood up and I said she was out of town. And the board members, one of the board members turned to me and said, get out of this room right now. Leave this room. Get out of this room right now. You are not allowed to speak in this room. Get out. I'm quoted.
And she's a
We're sitting
retired
right
lieutenant
there.
colonel.
We could easily have given them the information they needed to make a quality decision, not a hasty, malicious decision.
Laurie, there's still so many questions. I think, one, just the way that the meeting was handled yesterday, I think a lot of people have concerns about that. Again, I know that there's supposed to be a video of the meetings, or that's what I've been told. I'm hoping that we can see that soon. Um, the issue of hand-marked paper ballots, and like you said at the very beginning of the interview, so many people have very strong emotions about hand-marked paper ballots. And what I find really interesting is that there in Searcy County, this was a bipartisan issue. The Democrats and the Republicans, both of y'all came together and y'all said, this is what we want and this is how we want to move forward as a county. And we have our President Trump, calling for paper ballots. There was a video that, came out several months ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I'm not sure, where our governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is there and he's talking about paper ballots and she's present. She has said that she is working on that as well. And so I think a lot of people just have the question in their minds, what is it about Searcy County? Rightly or wrongly, it seems as though there is an attack on paper ballots in Arkansas, that Searcy County is being punished and that Searcy County is being made an example of, and that if anyone else tries to do this here in Arkansas, this will happen to you as well. And that is what a lot of people are speculating. What would you say to that?
I would say that when in 23, what we were talking about actually in 24, all of the public discussions from the authorities, their first and primary point was you cannot get an accurate count when you hand count paper ballots. And then we did 100% accurate count. We were audited, right? So we proved that you could get an accurate hand count with paper ballots. Then they said paper ballots are going to cost a fortune. Counties can't afford to do paper ballots. Well, when I put all the numbers together, I did an interview where I shared the numbers from our 24 primary compared to our 22 primary. We spent 20% less on our 24 primary than we did on our 22 primary. 22 was with machines, 24 was with hand marked, hand counted paper ballots. We saved 20% on that. So now a second part of the mantra has been destroyed. And I feel like they got to the point now, this is pure speculation, okay? Because I don't know what's in their minds. I don't know what they're thinking. There's no way for me to know that. But I feel like every time they had a good fighting point against paper ballots, our real life experience proved that that was not the case. So we kept knocking out the strength of their argument against paper ballots. And finally, they just had to discredit us. And I feel like that's really what has happened. I can just imagine some conversation somewhere in some back room. I don't know. I don't even want to go there, but I can imagine that at some point there was this thought is we've got to discredit these people because they keep discrediting our arguments against paper ballots by their real life experience in real live elections.
What type of precedent do you think that this sets if a board can come in and just unilaterally remove um, elected commissioners such as yourself? I mean, you are party appointed officials there in Searcy County. And um, and like what I just said again, this was a bipartisan effort of both Republicans and Democrats. Are you concerned at all about what type of precedent this may set?
I am. I feel like it's a slap in the face to the parties who appointed us, first of all. It's a slap in the face to our county who trusted us and asked us to put on a certain kind of an election. Commissioners don't decide if they're going to use machines or use paper. In this state, the quorum court decides. If, or in the case of Independence County, the people decided because they put it on a ballot as a ballot initiative.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we've got a board of 6 people who are, and I've said this before, I feel like at this point, they're out of control. I don't know why. I don't know what their purpose is. There is no oversight. It appears to me that they can do whatever they want to whoever they want, whenever they want. There's no one who holds them accountable for the things that they do or the lives that they harm. I watched them just destroy 2 beautiful ladies from a different county in a hearing that they had before they got to our things. And I mean, just in the nastiest, most malicious way possible for something that they didn't even do. And I sat there and I thought, what is the purpose behind first of all, the way they're treating these ladies in this hearing? And these ladies don't have an appeal. We don't have an appeal. They said, well, you can appeal this decision, but we have to appeal it before that board. So,
Yeah.
right, why would I even waste my time? Because I know what they're going to decide. Because yesterday I watched them give us the harshest penalty available to them. If they had been a court of law in a murder case, they would have given us the death penalty. because it was the harshest penalty they had available to them, 14 years. They could have said 2 years. They went all the way to 14 years on no evidence, innuendo, speculation. And we were sitting right in the room where we could have answered their questions. If they had wanted if they had wanted our side of it, if they had wanted any kind of actual factual information, we were right there ready. And they wouldn't even turn to us. I said, if you speak, we're throwing you out of this room.
Where do you go now? Are you going to file an appeal, or will there be additional action taken? And again, paper ballots. At the heart of this is paper ballots, or what
Yeah,
many would say would be the issue, because really, Searcy County, you guys didn't have any issues until you decided to pass that resolution in 2023. Do you think that this deters other counties from moving forward with
it
this?
would.
What type of message do you think this does send to
It
anyone else
says
who wants to consider paper ballots?
it says if you do paper ballots, we are going to make your life miserable until you quit. Or we're going to actually they talked about legal action, turning us over to an ethics commission because they said taking donations. It wasn't a donation, it was a lease agreement that they were familiar with, that they had no problem with in the primary. I mean, I just have to go back to that, you know, and they said these people must be fraudulent. They must be doing fraudulent things under the table. They questioned our character. They maligned our character. And so for me, I mean, working in an election is really a community service. You don't, even poll workers, they don't
Yeah.
get paid for those kind of hours, minimum wage. They do it because it's something they feel strongly about, because they want to serve their community. Anyone who's a commissioner it's a community service. We don't get paid by the hour. We get $100 per meeting that we have. And all of the other time that we spend running an election, it's just we give it to our community gladly, happily. We want to do it. But why would you choose to do that if you know that that kind of persecution awaits you? I mean, it's a powerful message, Jenny. If someone had gone through what I've gone through, or all three of us have gone through the last 2 years, when I was looking at becoming a commissioner and they had told me their story, I would not be a commissioner. And I will tell you this, our county is in trouble because everyone knows what has been going on. And I've already been told, we have a meeting tonight, a Republican meeting tonight, and I've already been told we don't know anyone who we can appoint to step up and replace you. Nobody
Mm.
wants to do it. Everyone's afraid to do it.
Well, that begs even more questions. I do want to know who runs the elections there. Then what is the protocol if you all have no election commissioners? What does the state do?
I think the state will step in. I have heard, kind of in passing stories about other counties where either the commissioners quit, because a lot of people, they're appointed commissioner and then they get involved and they think, oh my
Sure.
gosh, this is confusing. This is hard. I don't want to do this. This takes way more than time than I thought. You hear the word commissioner and you think, oh, that's kind of, I'm going to be a commissioner. No, it's hard work.
Yeah.
And so there have been times when commissioners have quit or commissioners have been decertified the way that we were. And I know that the state then steps in and helps the county run their elections.
You mentioned you have a Republican committee meeting tonight. What would you say as far as, we have a Republican supermajority legislature, a Republican state party. Um, what, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't. But you mentioned just the power grab and the overreach. Do you see any issues or any fractures within our Republican Party right now that speaks to just the way that even this was handled in Searcy County?
You know, I'm not a political creature. I'm in the party because I align with the values of the party, but I'm not political within the party. I'm not on committees. I don't go to state meetings or, conferences. And so I honestly do not understand power structure within parties or political, I don't understand that. And so I can't really speak to that, but I can say this. If the party will not hold um, boards like this one accountable for the chaos that they cause if they're out of control, then who's going to? Because we're appointed by the party. I feel like my party should step up and say, wait a minute. And, the Secretary of State is supposedly a Republican. Our governor is supposedly a Republican. I don't know them personally, but the people, what happened yesterday, what happened under the auspices of the Secretary of State who was chairing that meeting. And I have to assume that anyone who is working in those types of positions is accountable to the governor of the state at some point. I think it would be easy for the governor when the governor hears about this to go to those people and say, wait a minute, that is way overreach. That's not the way we're running the state. These are our people. These are our Republican appointees, right? That's what you would think would happen.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
it would.
some would argue that's a separate constitutional office, and the person responsible would be our Secretary of State, like you said, Cole Jester. And to that, and he was recently appointed, I guess, maybe in
Right.
January, was it January of
I think so. Yeah.
2025? But this issue has been going on for a long time. But I guess, Laurie, just for a final note, anything that you would like to add, or, where do we go from here? If we don't have control of our elections, do we have a country? And this seems to be such a battle that, it's happening all across the country right now.
For me, when we first started this journey, I, like I said, I was really on the fence about whether machines are okay or not okay, or paper ballots are better or worse or whatever. When our county decided to go to paper ballots, I mean, the state says a county can hold their elections either way. And I just thought we were choosing one of two options. No big deal. Since then, the incredible opposition, the threats, I do call it persecution because that is what it has been, persecution. At one point I stopped and I said, wait a minute, why do they care? Because the law says we can have paper ballots in our county. What is behind this level of opposition to a tiny little county that votes about 3,000 ballots every election? What's behind it? And it's not us. They don't care about our county. They don't care about the votes that are cast in our county, because the votes cast in our county will never move a state or federal election one way or the other. It has to be paper ballots. Now I have to say, why? Why do they care if we vote by paper ballot or by machine? There's only one reason someone would care to that extent. And you can use your imagination. But if it doesn't matter how we vote, they wouldn't care how we vote. So it clearly matters to somebody how we vote. It has made me an incredibly strong proponent of paper ballots. I now believe everything that I hear about machines, because if machines were not manipulatable, if they weren't hackable, if they couldn't be programmed to change an election, the people in power would not care if we used paper ballots. And I do believe this issue right here, the how we vote, machines or paper ballots, is the ground zero battle in our country today for our country. Because if we don't have elections that are secure, if votes can be manipulated, then we don't really have a country. And I believe that totally and firmly. And I believe it because of what's happened the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, Laurie, thank you so much for joining Conduit and taking the time to share your story and what has gone on in Searcy County. I know it hasn't been easy, but we really appreciate it. We will continue to reach out to the Election Commission and the board. We continue to get voicemail, but we're going to follow the story and try to get all of the answers as much as we can. But Laurie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Have a great day.